All right, so it's 7 o'clock. We can call the meeting to order. And we're gonna jump right into the MBTA communities information session, and we'll get back to normal business after the session. So with that, I'm gonna hand it over to Valerie.
Great, thank you. Let me share my screen. All right. Well, welcome. Thank you all for attending tonight. This is the Planning Board's MBTA Communities Information Session. I'm Valerie Ortiz. I'm the Planning Director, and also presenting tonight is Michael Slagle, our Land Use Planner and GIS Administrator. So tonight we're talking about four main categories in terms of the MBTA or Section 3A communities. We'll start off with Zoning 101 and Section 3A context. Then we'll go into the 3A basics, Stow's requirements and needs, and then our next step for this planning process. So just to kick us off, I have a quick poll looking to know a little bit more about how you all heard about tonight's event. So if you just want to take a few seconds and let us know where you heard about it. Curious to know what's working. Seeing some responses come in, about 50%. All right. I'm going to close this for about 86% participated. So you can share that out. It looks like most people are here because they learned about it through the Independent, but also some board and committee members, of course, got the planning board here. All right. And then I have another one as well. And we're doing this in part because this is going to come up again later on tonight. So just getting used to doing the polls. So we'd also like to hear kind of how familiar you are with the 3A or MBTA community zoning requirements. So just let us know if there's a category here that you feel kind of meets where you're at. It's kind of interesting for us to know, where you all fall. All right. So it looks like kind of a range here. So some very familiar, some somewhat, some slightly, so kind of all across the board. So we'll try to keep that in mind as we move through the presentation tonight. All right, so Zoning 101 and Section 3A context. First off, what is zoning? So it's our primary tool for regulating land uses and building dimensions. So it regulates how an owner can develop their land, if it's residential, business, commercial, industrial. Our zoning talks about requirements for improvements made to the land, such as parking, lighting, deed restricted, affordable housing, and also design standards. And then zoning can also talk about building dimensions. So the shape, height, size of buildings, distance between buildings, separating land uses. And it's important to know that all zoning changes need to go through Stow town meeting. So they all need to be locally adopted. And so zoning matters because, as I said before, we talk about residential uses. So housing is a foundation of community. Zoning sets rules for what can be built and where, determines who can live, work, and play in our communities. So if we use it appropriately, it's one of the most powerful tools we have to meet our goals. And there are many towns in the state that have stringent and inflexible zoning that has made it illegal or impossible to build anything other than a single-family home. So this is what we talk about when we say exclusionary zoning. So we'll go into that a little bit more in the future slides here. But essentially, our zoning can both push out people who can't afford a single-family home and does not welcome those who wish to live in multifamily housing. So a couple of impacts with exclusionary zoning is high home prices. So zoning can create barriers to building housing. And when there is a limited supply, we know that prices will skyrocket. So even in Stow, a the median sales price for a single family home is now 50% higher than it was in 2016. And over 80% of housing in Stow are single family homes. And we also know this is tied to the racial wealth gap. So 70% of white households in Greater Boston own their own home, compared to 37% of Black households and 31% of Hispanic households. There's also a traffic impact. So residents are needing to live further away from their jobs when they lack housing choice, which causes them to spend more time in their cars. So if we build housing near jobs and transit opportunities, that'll make it possible for future residents to live without a car, but also maybe just to spend less time commuting. We also know there's environmental impact with exclusionary zoning. So single family homes have a greater carbon footprint than multifamily housing. So in this way, we're looking to better align our zoning with Stow's recently adopted climate action plan. So this chart on the right is a bit complicated, I admit. Essentially trying to look at, on the left, single family homes, on the right, multifamily homes. And so what we're seeing is that even if it's a typical subdivision development or transit-oriented development, which means that housing is located near transit opportunities or goods and services, there still is a much less environmental impact if you're living in a multifamily home. So I'm not going to go too much more into this slide, but I'll just note that the slides will be available on our website to review after. So a couple of these have a lot of information on them, but we'll make them all public. So why was Section 3A signed into law? The purpose is to stimulate economic development and to address the housing shortage by encouraging new housing near transit or economic centers. So towns must change our local zoning to remove barriers to multifamily housing development. So we know that with a regional issue, we're going to need a regional response. So growing a healthy and sustainable regional economy requires providing housing options at a variety of scales and a wide range of price points. So after decades of underproducing housing across every town in the Commonwealth, we've got ourselves into a serious housing shortage. So these high home prices are pushing out college graduates, young families, older adults, and even people with moderate incomes, which all poses a threat to our economy as well as working families who are squeezed out, and many residents we're seeing are leaving the state. So I'm going to pass this to Michael to walk us through the basics of Section 3A.
Perfect. Thank you, Valerie. Yes, as Valerie said, I will take us through the Section 3A basics. Go to the next slide. Perfect. So in the Section 3A basics, I'm going to go over a little bit about what 3A is for all municipalities that are impacted. So the first is there are 177 MBTA communities within Massachusetts, and these are broken down into different categories, and each category has different deadlines for compliance. The first is rapid transit communities, then we have commuter rail communities, adjacent communities, and then what Stow is, an adjacent small town. All of these communities have to adopt 4 of these overarching principles. The first being legalize multifamily housing as of right. This multifamily housing cannot have age restrictions and must be suitable for families. The multifamily district would have to have a density of 15 units per acre, and the municipality would have to amend their zoning or create a new zoning district of reasonable size, which we'll get into a little bit later. So as we dive in, here are 3 just fairly simple concepts that I'll hopefully go through quickly. The first is that idea of by right. And a by right is something that is allowed under the zoning bylaw. So currently we have the example of single family houses. They're allowed by right in Stow. You don't have to go to the planning board. You don't have to go to the zoning board of appeals to build a single family house, as long as you comply with a few other regulations, such as it can't be too tall and it has to be within the setbacks from the property line. Zoning doesn't restrict everything. There are some other ideas that you would have to, other regulations that you'd have to go through in a by right development. When we say it must not be age restricted, that means that you can't set a minimum age or maximum age for occupants. So this would say that there cannot be senior only housing. And when we say it must be suitable for families, that means that the new development cannot be, we can't use the zoning to restrict the number of bedrooms, the size of bedrooms, or the number of occupants within a dwelling. So these are fairly straightforward. A lot of times, if you know anything about zoning, you'll be familiar with some of these ideas. So now we'll get into what multifamily housing is. And the state has a definition of multifamily housing. So this would be a building with 3 or more residential dwelling units, or 2 or more buildings on the same lot with more than 1 residential dwelling in each building. So this is a very broad definition of what multifamily housing is. And we could really use this to shape what we want to see in Stow. So now that I just said what that definition is, we can look at some examples of what multifamily housing looks like. So this picture here shows different types of multifamily dwellings. On the left side, we see what a single family detached dwelling is, and that's what we're used to in Stow, and that would not be considered multifamily housing. But in that middle section towards the end, you can see that there are these buildings that would contain more than 1 unit. With section 3A, we don't have to go into any specific type of multifamily housing, but we can kind of use this as a toolbox for inspiration of what we would want to see in the future. On the next slide, we can see that there are some benefits already to multifamily housing. It can help older adults who wish to downsize. Young college graduates can come back and live in their hometown if they'd like, or in a different town. Young couples can get that their first home. One thing that we like to say is that multifamily housing can help retain employees. So if businesses in a town struggle with housing affordability, multifamily housing can be a solution to help them. Grandparents can remain close to their grandchildren. That could be if the grandparent lives in a multifamily house, or if they have young grandchildren, they're living with their parents in a multifamily dwelling. And when we add additional multifamily housing, we're able to get some new neighbors and see some of the opportunities that they are able to bring to us. So the next main part of the 3A requirements is density. And density, we like to, a lot of people think is a scary thing, but it's a relatively simple concept. So density is the number of housing units located within a lot. So you would measure that usually, so the number of units, which could be 2 apartments, it could be 1 house, it could be 3 units within 1 building, and then the area of the lot. So for example, we have option or example A, which is a single family house on a 1-acre lot. So we would say that that lot has a density of 1 unit per acre. If we add 2 units to that 1-acre lot, like in example B, we would say that that density of that property is 2 units per acre. And then if we have a single family house on a large lot, like a 2-acre lot, we would say that that density is 1/2 a unit per acre. So we decided we want to take this presentation, make it a little bit more interactive and fun. As we went through earlier, Valerie had that poll that you did earlier, so that was a good practice. But we're going to have what we're calling the Guess the Density game. And this is going to show some examples of density in Stow, and we're going to see if you're able to guess the density, see which properties are a little bit more dense than others. And I'll guide you through it as we go through the different slides. So you'll just have to look at the picture, hear the information that I'm talking about, and then select what answer you think represents the density of that parcel. Right. So this is our first example. This is the newest subdivision in Stow, Joanne Drive. This picture here is a 1-unit building. And this building was built in a planned conservation district, which means it can have a little bit smaller lot size than what's allowed in the zoning bylaw. So right now the zoning bylaw allows for 1.5 units per acre. So this would be a little bit smaller than that. So we have 4 options here. What density do you think this could be? Right. I'm seeing that. Yeah.
Some come in.
Yeah, I'm actually able to see it coming
Oh,
in as
perfect.
well because I'm co-host. That's cool.
Ah, excellent.
Yep, so I'm seeing a few different answers coming in. Should we give another few seconds?
Sure, yeah. Your answers are all anonymous, so don't feel embarrassed by this one. This is really just
Mhm.
kind of just a test of the game.
All right, I guess I'll hit end poll. And Valerie can go to the next slide. So the correct answer for this one was actually answer C. This one has 1.07 units per acre, which is, let's see, I'll share the result. Are you sharing it, Valerie? Yep, okay.
I am sharing. I don't know if you can see it, but so no one chose C.
Interesting.
Most was option B, which was just a little under. So B and C were basically the same. So
Perfect. All right. So hopefully this is kind of starting to get you to think a little bit more about the density that we have in Stow. We'll go off to our next example. So this one is, what is the density of this building on Great Road? I'll give you a little hint. There are more than 1 unit in this building, and this building is on a fairly small lot. So does anyone have any idea as to what the density of this might be? Looks like we're getting lots of answers in. About 5 more seconds. All right, great. So I'll end the poll here. Valerie, you can go to the next slide to reveal the answer.
sorry.
So this one is option D. This one is a relatively highly dense property in Stow. It has 4 units on less than half of an acre. So this one has a density of 9.68 units per acre. So I think that might be a little bit surprising to some people because we don't think of Stow as being very dense. All right. So on this, we have 2 notable developments that are within Stow. We have Meeting House at Stow and Elizabeth Brook Apartments. Both of these offer apartment style accommodations for residents, but they both have different densities. So looking at these images, which parcel or which property do you think has a higher density? Right, most everyone's answered. We're at 84%. Give another, oh,
Sorry.
oh, all good. So we can show the next slide, which reveals that it is actually Elizabeth Brook Apartments that has a higher density than Meeting House at Stow. You can see that Meeting House at Stow has a fairly large parcel compared to Elizabeth Brook Apartments. It has 15.9 acres versus 12.07 acres. So they are similar in density, but not exactly the same. All right. On our next slide, we have 2 duplexes, and these are 2 units within 1 building. Which of these two buildings do you think is denser? Getting a lot of answers in. Do another few seconds. Right, so we can end the poll. And the answer for this one is option A, which is the symmetrical duplex. While they both have 2 units, the one on the left side, the symmetrical duplex, has a slightly smaller lot, giving it a slightly higher density than the other one. We have 2 more of these rounds. Hopefully they might go a little bit quicker, but we have 3 different pictures here. Option A shows sorry about that. They have 3 of the same pictures, but they're arranged from least dense to most dense. Is option A at the top the arranged correctly, or is option B at the bottom arranged correctly? All right, another 5 seconds.
Someone's got to break the tie.
It is a tie.
It is tied right now.
I just ended it,
There you go.
oops. So the correct answer is option B. So the first picture shows a unit at the Villages at Stow off of Great Road near the old Bose site. The middle option shows a duplex in town center. And the one on the right side shows a triplex located near Lower Village. And you can see that the densities of these can vary. So they can look kind of similar in size, but when you look at density, you really have to look at the full picture of the site. All right, and we have one last question. And this one is a picture of the most densely developed parcel in Stow. So we're wondering, what do you think the density of this parcel is? We have 4 options for you. It looks like we're getting some mixed answers in. We'll give it another 5 or 10 seconds. All right. And the poll, you can share out the results. So the answer for this one is that this unit here has a density of 17.89 units per acre. So this is the densest parcel in Stow, and it's located in Gleasondale, actually. So hopefully this game helped teach you a little bit about density and kind of what density we already have here in Stow. I can go to the next slide for just some quick takeaways from this. And the purpose of this activity was to just break up the presentation a little bit and get you interacting. But it also is to show that density can be achieved through multiple different ways. You know, some of the big buildings and stuff that we think are really dense actually don't have that density that we think they actually do, or some of these small buildings in Stow actually have a much higher density. A lot of the denser parcels in Stow are from older housing, and a lot of these came before zoning was in place. So these are considered to be the pre-existing non-conforming buildings. And then higher density is not something that we see through the traditional subdivision process through Stow's zoning, but rather through the 40B developments or through a comprehensive permit. So those allow for some of the, for developers to build without following the zoning bylaw strictly in exchange for creating affordable housing. So we can see that, we can get some dense developments through different avenues, but zoning is one of the main ways that prevents multifamily housing in some of this denser development from being built. So I will pass this off to Valerie to talk a little bit about Stow's requirements and what a district of reasonable size, like I mentioned earlier, would mean for Stow.
Great, thank you. Okay, so some of this is going to be a bit of a repeat from before because a lot of Stow's requirements are the same for other communities. So again, it's to legalize multifamily housing as of right, to not have, zoning cannot have age restrictions, and it must be suitable for families. Again, we have the minimum density of 15 units an acre, which we see now that already exists in some part of Stow. And then we must create or amend a zoning district or an overlay district that's of a reasonable size. So in Stow, we're looking for a minimum unit capacity of 139 housing units. So essentially, we need to get to a zoning district that's a size that can at 15 units an acre provide for 139 housing units. We don't have a specific location requirement for Stow, simply that it's developable land, which I'll go into further. And then our deadline to comply is December 31st, 2025. So I just said that Stow has that unit capacity of 139 units, but what does unit capacity really mean? So it's basically what could theoretically be built under a zoning bylaw, but it does not mandate production of housing units. So for an example, in this image, we have a parcel that has the zoning capacity of 4 units. And here we see that 2 units are built on it. There could be nothing built there, or there could be that 4-unit structure there. So for Stow, our location requirements is that our land must be developable. So essentially that means that it's going to be privately owned land or public land, but there's very limiting categories for what public land that's still eligible to be to go to our requirement here. So we also have this list of excluded lands from the district, and that includes water bodies, already protected open space, rights of way, wellhead protection areas, institutional land, so land where public schools, museums, utilities are located, and then some publicly owned land. So we also have a few other requirements. The law asks that we have 10% of units in our district to be affordable, deed restricted affordable to those earning 80% of the area median income. And this is actually already aligned with our current zoning for subdivisions. But if residents are interested, we could offer a greater percentage of affordability or deeper affordability. What we would have to do is conduct a third-party economic feasibility analysis just to show that it's still feasible potentially in the future to construct those units. We also have to abide by the Wetlands Protection Act, of course, as well as Title V, that's the septic requirements. We also cannot impose requirements that are generally not applicable to other uses. So we cannot place higher energy standards on these units or design guidelines. So how can we shape our 3A response to fit Stow's needs? Well, We're lucky that we have a recently updated housing production plan to give us an up-to-date picture of Stow's needs as related to our changing demographics, our housing stock, and affordability. So I won't read through all of these, but we know that our population is growing. We have limited rental opportunities in Stow, and we have significant concerns with affordability. 20% of households are cost burdened, and we do not have enough of deed restricted affordable housing for every income eligible household in Stow. So go into affordability a little bit more, just to give you a better picture of what this means and who we're really talking about when we say folks that can either afford to live in Stow or only afford to live in Stow through a deed restricted unit. So 3A looks at the 80% of the area median income. And on this chart, we have what that means for a 1-person through 4-person household. We also know that Stow's average monthly homeownership payment is $2,838 per month, and the average monthly rent is $1,610. Though I will just qualify that a little bit because the rental number has a high margin of error because we have such few rental opportunities in Stow. So that figure could be actually quite a bit off. So we're going to take a look at 3 different types of jobs. One, a Dunkin' Donuts cashier, which we still are living in this Dunkin' desert. But again, to try to stimulate the economy, to make sure that we have housing for businesses that we want to see in Stow, we're going to take a look at that. Also, a Stow librarian, full-time, and a full-time patrol officer. So the Dunkin' Donuts cashier, this is from a job posting in Acton, would make about $39,520 per year. And so we're calculating cost burden, so the amount that the cashier can spend on housing without being cost burdened. So that is only $988 per month. So some people would say that 30% of your income is still a lot to spend on housing, but that is 30% there. So on $988 a month, you're not able to afford rent, you're not able to afford that monthly homeownership payment, and you would be you'd be making far less than that 80% AMI. For the Stow librarian, it's about $47,500 per year. So again, without being cost burdened, that person could afford to pay $1,187 per month on housing. So again, not enough for the market rate units, but depending on their household makeup, they could potentially qualify for that deed restricted affordable housing. The patrol officer is making about $84,000 a year, and without being cost burdened, so without spending 30% of their income on housing or more than that on housing, they could spend $2,101 per month. So they would be able to make that monthly rent. They are not earning enough for the monthly home ownership. So just considering, the kinds of jobs that are available and who we're talking about when we say affordable housing and wanting to make sure that we have a good percentage in our future housing stock. So we can also take a look through the housing production plan survey and just see what residents are hoping for. So on the left, we have the top words used to describe favorite things about living in Stow. So we're seeing rural, open space, community, friendly, but it's small. And the top words used to describe what residents believe would make Stow a better place to live. So affordability, more housing, village, sidewalks, businesses, restaurants. Also from the housing production plan survey, we saw that the top housing stock concerns in Stow were the need for small scale single family homes, the need for mixed use development, as well as the need for duplexes, townhouses, and triplexes. The top community needs for housing in Stow is support of aging in place, housing for people with lower or fixed incomes, and local workforce housing. The most desired future housing features in Stow include access to open space, having enough space for my family, and an affordable rent or mortgage. So all of that is to say that what we know about Stow, what we know about our community's interests, the needs that we have around housing and affordability are going to lay the groundwork for this planning process. So we're looking to answer a few questions, not tonight, but throughout the course of the coming months and year. So we're looking for understanding better, where could a multifamily district be located to best fit our needs? What do residents feel is a reasonable size for the district? Do residents want to explore the inclusion of more deed-restricted affordable units? What types of multifamily housing should be encouraged in Stow? So we will create opportunities to receive that feedback through this planning process. So these are some of our next steps, but again, this is only the near future. So just toward the next milestone, which is that fall forum. So staff will continue our monthly meetings with the CHAPA small town cohort, continue monthly discussions with the planning board. We're going to work to secure, we have secured technical assistance through the Mass Housing Partnership. We'll start discussing more with other town boards and committees, their ideas around locations and their thoughts on where the district should be located, what the housing should look like. And we'll analyze all that feedback received and start to work on potential locations coming up to that fall forum. So our goal is to adopt compliant zoning in May 2025. So that concludes our formal presentation, but I wanted to take the opportunity to see if there are any questions that have come out of tonight, or anything that you would want staff to look into more or pay attention to as we dive further into this process. All right, Vickery.
I have a question, and that is, so much of our development depends upon water availability. And, is there a way that this new ruling could be used to force water for the, where the, Shaw's and things like that, so that you could be innovative and have some building on top of stores, or reconfigure that? I know that configuration has been looked at numerous times, but it all depends upon the water. So is this a way of forcing building a large water tank or whatever?
So a couple different things there. I don't want to just outright say, no, because I don't know what might be possible in terms of private development agreements. But typically, what we've seen in other communities and communities like Stow is that 3A does not require towns to provide any utilities. So there's no requirement for Stow to create a water system or to create septic or sewer. So this is really all on private developers. Though I can't say, what types of agreements a private developer might make with adjacent landowners in terms of creating a new public water supply. The question around, what could happen in Lower Village to really incentivize development is a really interesting one. There are a few ways, though, that our current zoning in Lower Village, the new Lower Village business district zoning, is kind of out of step, out of sync with the with 3A. So there are a couple of things that would really need to change in order for that district to be aligned with 3A. And I can't say that that would be in alignment with the town's vision for that business district either. So we currently have a limit on bedrooms, and we would not be able to limit bedrooms with 3A. We also would not, we'd have to limit businesses to the ground floor, and in no case would more than 33% of the floor area of a building be able to be used for business use. And we would need to have the housing component still be by right, so no special permit involved. And knowing that this would require a lot of new development, I'm hesitant to say that the town would have the appetite for that because it's so much, the special permit process would provide us with much greater control over what a development would look like. So I think that what I would need to hear is more interest in housing in Lower Village over businesses in order to further consider that. But we're so early in the process, I don't want to rule anything out, but it's important to know that. Laura?
Thank you. I may have missed this at the very beginning. Would projects that have not yet been built, such as the golf course village, count towards this? And also, what is the density of that? Is that an example of the kind of density that we would need?
That's a question that we thought would probably be coming. So while I might pass the density question to Michael, I'll first answer the question of whether we could put our zoning district over the Stow Acres North Course. So for those on the meeting that might not be familiar with that, there's currently a comprehensive permit, a 40B project that is under permitting for the North Course of Stow Acres that would bring 189 units to Stow. And so we've actually seen from the state that they have rejected a 3A zoning when it is over a land that is either currently under a permitting process or even recently in the last few years developed. So we know that I believe it was the town of Wellesley that had that had suggested putting a district over a parcel that they knew would be developed in a different way. So we know the state will not look favorably on that and will reject it. Also, I think, that parcel is, I believe, about 70 acres. So depending on what residents are after, we have the minimum requirements of 9.3 acres. I can't say that residents would be interested in increasing that to 70. And Michael, do you know what that density might be?
Yes, so the overall density of that site is 2.7 units per acre. A large part of that development, though, is going to be open space for small private parks for the residents of those in that development. So it is a little bit misleading because there is a large amount that would not be considered in the density calculations. But for some of the single family dwellings, it could be anywhere from 4 to 8 units per acre. But I don't know the exact what would be considered from the state's perspective, that density. But overall, it's 2.7 units per acre.
It just seems to me that the most desirable way to provide dense housing is adjacent to some kind of open space that doesn't cause you to lose the density requirement, but gives people the space that they need, because it's very difficult to live. I've lived in dense housing and you crave outdoor space. And we have a lot of outdoor space in this town. So if there was a way to build near it, that would be really great.
Thank you for that. Yes, we'll take a note of that. And I think that's something that we heard so much of through the recent housing production plan process is people who already live in Stow love that about Stow very much. And they would want future housing to be located near trails and open space. So
Right.
I think that's absolutely aligned with what we've heard already. And it's great to hear that again tonight. So thank you.
And if I could just piggyback one thing, a suggested parcel area that I would suggest is the no longer in use golf course on White Pond Road is a huge parcel of land, very near to open space. Yeah, I would just put it out there.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments at this time? Or like Laura, if there are other ideas around location or criteria for locations, we would be interested in hearing that too.
I have a quick question, Valerie. I just
Sure.
wanted to make sure I understood. Is the idea that we're going to look to achieve the MBTA Communities Act goals with one 15-acre parcel of land? Is that where the plan is for everything to be located? Or is that maybe the centerpiece and then there might be other places in town for other smaller developments?
So, oh, sorry, I'm getting some feedback. That's an interesting question, and some towns have done some pretty creative things with where their districts are located. So just to clarify, it is not a 15-acre parcel, but 15 units per acre. And so in order to get to our minimum unit capacity of 139 units, we would need to zone to have at least 9.3 acres of developable land within the district. Now, I don't know yet if residents are interested in meeting the minimum or if they may be interested in a little bit more density. Well, we have yet to see that. The law does have pretty strict requirements in terms of contingencies, or sorry, contiguous parcels. So we're not able to have parcels of less than 5 acres count toward our location, our district. That's not to say that we can't zone for it, but it would not count toward what the state is looking for. So some towns have chosen, like our neighboring town of Acton has a what they call big 3A district, so a very dense district of 20 units an acre near their transit station. And they have a secondary small 3A district of 10 unit an acre density in another location of town. And so on average, they're getting 15 units an acre, which the state has accepted. So there are creative ways of meeting this. So I think that we'll need to, again, first think about location, what makes sense for Stow, what residents are after, before maybe thinking about if there's room for a secondary district.
Are there ways of petitioning that you could use, some of these existing plans, building on these existing plans, as, the comment that Laura had made and your comment back to Laura? I just wonder how much flexibility is, just because, I don't know how much free acreage we have, but we're known as a town with extensive conservation land, and, we want to, provide housing, but we also want to keep the character of Stow. So, it's a real compromise. I also want to say that perhaps Stow could increase the salary of the librarian. I know that a number of librarians make 65 to 70,000. So I think that, having been married to one for many a year, so this librarian is paid way underneath the rate that is seen, in the state of Massachusetts. And also the rental here at $1,600 per a house or a unit is extremely low. It's over $2,600 for that same in Boston.
Right.
And graduate students make $43,000 a year and are, that's what they're up against. So I think we just have to also consider the dynamics in other places in terms of equity and parity.
Yeah, thank you for that comment. I think We do have to remember that the $1,600 a month could be quite far off. So it is hard to know. I love the support of the library. That's a fantastic response to that as well. And I think we'll have this fall forum that will dive more into the locations. So I think that will be a great opportunity to kind of take a look at some mapping that we will do to show where we might have some opportunities and start to draft a boundary for the district. So those are great thoughts. So more coming for that. Before I get to John, did Laura have another comment that you might have wanted to make?
No, I just forgot to take my
Oh.
hand down.
Not a problem. All right, John.
I'm sorry. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I was just wondering, in terms of taking a look kind of holistically as like an impact on schools, has there been any assessment to that? Do we have the capacity? Thank you.
Yes. So we did take a look at schools in the most recent update to the housing production plan. So we're seeing in Stow, as is true across the state, that school enrollment is dropping. So even in communities where the population has remained steady or even increased, it has decreased. So, I think a good example of this, well, first I'll say that there was a recent report done from our regional housing corporation as well as the state that really looked into the impact of new housing development on school enrollment versus just the turnover of existing homes. And what they found is that the new housing development really had very little to no impact on school enrollment. And in fact, it was the turnover of existing homes that had a more significant impact. So, thinking of the family that might stay in Stow until their student is done with high school to get a great education at Neshoba or qualify for the area vocational technical schools. And then they do leave Stow for other opportunities, and a new family with new children come into that place. So one example is from the town of Hopkinton. So they saw an 18% increase in housing units in their town between 2010 and 2016. So 18% increase in housing and only a 2% increase in their school enrollment in that same period. So we're looking at our school sizes, looking at enrollment trends across the region. We are seeing that teachers are being laid off. I think that it's fair to say that it's not a concern at this point.
Thank you.
Thanks. Are there other comments right now? Any other questions?
I guess one clarifying point, I just listening to the comments, Valerie, I thought we should make is that the land that we identify does not have to be vacant. So even though we're saying it has to be developable, it doesn't mean that can be nothing else on it existing. And so we may look and decide that we're going to do an overlay district on, existing single family home lots. And that doesn't mean that anything has to change. It just gives other options for future development on those parcels. So there's multiple ways to identify land, and certainly one is to say, these are the sort of vacant or available developable areas in the town, but the other is to identify areas based on whatever other criteria location wise that may already have single family houses on it, and to do an overlay district from a zoning standpoint that would allow that in the future. And that's not to say that that's what we're going to do. I just want to make sure everybody understands that's an option.
Thank you so much for making that clarification. Yes. So in the previous slide that discussed unit capacity, it can be a vacant lot, certainly, but it could also have a home already on it. So while my answer to, I believe it was Vickery or Laura around the use of Stow acres for this district, I think it's still fair to look at older subdivisions as well. So other parts of town too, instead of developments that are currently in permitting or currently under construction. So I think that the older subdivisions would still be considered developable from the state. So it seems like the questions are dwindling down, and I'm looking at the time and realizing that we are, I don't want to take up too much of anyone's time here. But if there are additional questions or thoughts that come up tonight or in the coming weeks or months, please feel free to reach out to us, call us, email us, and look at our website that we have linked here to get more information about this process. We really do want to keep in contact with you. And want to know, what thoughts are as they arise, so that we can continue to fold them into our planning process. So, thank you all so much for attending tonight, and we'll look forward to our next forum.
Thanks, Valerie and Michael. That was a great presentation, very informational.